Here we go.
Welcome to a special edition of WoWcast, where we're going to talk about a patch 11.1.7 feature, and then a broader discussion about add-ons in World of Warcraft in general. I'm Dratnos, World of Warcraft content creator.
I'm Max. I'm the raid leader of Team Liquid, the WoW Guild, and a content creator as well.
And I'm Ian Hazzikostas, game director on WoW, and it's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
The fact that they needed to do a 43-minute video to talk about this change that they're doing in the game means that they knew exactly what it was going to be as far as like how controversial this was, because this has been all over my social medias and YouTube about people being pissed off about this, people being like, I'm trying to keep an open mind. That's what Zaryu was saying. You know, Asmon's video is called WoW is Done. So let's see if it's really as bad as everybody's saying it is.
Excited to be here. So what are we doing in 11.1.7?
A whole bunch of fun stuff, but one of the features that we're extra excited about is a new UI option that we're adding called Rotation Assist, which is...
Okay, so when he says 11.1.7, this is obviously like a retail patch. This has nothing to do with Classic WoW, except that it actually does. So retail is going to get all of these things first, and then if they're received well and the community in Classic wants them, you can bet your ass they're going to be coming to Classic. One of those things that I really hope is going to be coming to Classic is player housing in the form of guild housing. I really want that to happen. I think individual player housing would be a major mistake for Classic World of Warcraft, but I think having a centralized area where your entire guild can be centralized and kind of come together as a group, I think that's a phenomenal idea, and I think it would build a great sense of community. So that's an example of a system that is being put into retail that I hope will make its way over into Classic, and stuff like this is very much the same. We're for sure eventually going to get the UI changes that they did, I think, in Dragonflight, where you can customize it, which will be really good because a lot less people will have the, they'll stop feeling the need to use LVUI and stuff like that. And in my opinion, less add-ons is always a good thing.
Is really designed to help players who are maybe picking up a new spec or want some guidance on what abilities they should be using when, without having to turn to third-party add-ons for it. So we've seen that, there's an add-on called Hekili that is very popular with a lot of players. We're basically building in a very similar version of that into the base UI that you can opt into. That will, no matter what DPS spec you're playing, highlight the recommended next ability given your current energy, what's going on around you, and so forth. One extra thing that we're also going to do, which maybe goes a bit beyond what the add-ons can do, is also have a one-button version of that, where there'll be like a keybind that if you just want almost an auto rotation, you can opt into that, and it will just automatically cast the next recommended ability in the sequence. There'll be a small GCD penalty associated with that, but we want to make sure that this is for accessibility purposes, that it's there for people who maybe just honestly aren't interested in the gameplay of like mastering their spec. They want to explore Azeroth and experience the story, and the mechanics kind of get in the way of that sometimes. This should be for them. Ideally, this is not a tool where someone is like being told by their raid leader to stop.
Dude, I don't want to tell people to play the game. That's crazy. That is so crazy to me. Like, people who don't want the mechanics of playing their class to get in the way, that is nuts. What are we talking about? Like, that is the game. Oh my God, dude. I don't want to tell people they're playing the game wrong, but that's crazy. Also, like, let's get a little data here. I spell it right? Close enough. He said that this is like a really, like, it's a very popular add-on. 56 million downloads. Okay. So yeah, it's a pretty popular, like what is, how many does Questy have? So this has half less, a third of the downloads that Questy does. This is essentially a required add-on in Classic WoW. And this has a third of those downloads. So when they say that it's a relatively, popular add-on, like, this is a ridiculously popular add-on. Like, this is probably one of the more popular add-ons in the entire game. That's huge, right? Like, that's a lot. Wonder if we go to the top 20, like, what are 271 million? This isn't necessarily sorting by that. There's 58 million, 40 million. I mean, it's right on the front page, Hekili priority helper. So
Trying to DPS
my point to that is it's an extremely popular add-on.
manually and just turn on the one button mode to meet some DPS check. That we want to give you the tools to kind of go through that organic progression naturally.
Great.
But so the rotation assist doesn't come with a penalty or anything like that. That's just we're going to show you what your next button is.
Exactly.
Right.
It's very similar to the Hekili add-on. It's kind of reflecting, just the latest kind of established theory crafting, and it's something that we would continue to update, with spec changes and class changes over time. Ideally, it all's born out of the idea that we've seen a valuable tool that players feel like they should be looking outside the game to download, and we'd rather just reduce the barriers to that and make it available to everyone.
Okay.
That is such an important thing that he just said, and so good for the health of the game. In particular in Classic, by the way, that they're doing things like looking at add-ons that could potentially change the core way that you interact with the game, and saying people shouldn't have to go to third-party developers in order to get this. This is something we should be offering like natively inside of our game. That's a very, very good thing. And the reason it's a good thing is because you want the barrier to entry in a game to be as small as possible. So like when you play, I know this example has been done before, but it's a good example of like when you watch League of Legends, when you watch TSM versus whoever, when you're watching the highest level people in the world play League, you can literally download the client and you're playing the same game as them. Now, obviously, you're not playing it to the same level, right? Or even close, but it's the same game. It's not different. Dude, when you download World of Warcraft, you have to like level all the way up. You have to download all these add-ons. You got to get a good UI. You got to like understand what class you're playing, put your talents into the right thing, go grind dungeons, get all this gear. Then you can go do PvP, or then you can go to raid, but then you got to go to LFR, and then you got to go to normal, then you got to go to heroic, and then you got to go to mythic. Like there's so many barriers of entry into World of Warcraft. And if you think about like all the add-ons that we have, you have Questy and Leatrix maps and ElvUI and Tell Me Wins and Weak Auras and like all of these crazy method raid tools, right? All of these crazy things. And Weak Auras is like 1,000 things in one, right? You have nameplate add-ons like Plater and all of these different things that what they really do is they make you a significantly better player because they offer you more information available on your screen. They give you access to info that you normally wouldn't have access to through the native UI. But what that means is that you have access to information that other players don't have access to if they don't understand all those add-ons exist or even how to get to them. So Blizzard doing things like going and finding uses for add-ons in their games and saying this should be a part of our basic experience is a really good thing for the game. Also, as far as like the one button rotation thing, I like that they put a GCD penalty in there. I think that's good. And I see absolutely nothing wrong with the fact that there's like a add-on helper in the game to help you learn your rotation. Those, if you guys have never used one of those before, I think there was one called TNT back in the day, if I'm remembering correctly. Those add-ons allow you to play your class depending on the class that you play at like an 80% efficacy level. Like it's not a replacement for a good player. It can get you like you'll do okay, but like you really need to understand your rotation if you want to get like really good numbers, right? But getting people up and running to a point where they're serviceable, like maybe blue parsing, that's just a net positive for the game, period. Dude, I don't care how the raiders in my raid get their damage. I just want them doing more damage. That's it. I don't care. I want the people who are doing greens to get blues, and I want the people who are getting blues to get purples. That's all I care about. I mean, it's the basic social engineering game that Apple introduced with iPhone, even though WoW came out first. You create an app store and you look through the top utility apps like Flashlight Scanner, Note Taker, Video Editor, and then you just add those to apps to the feature or module on the base operating system. That's such a good point, dude. That's such a good point. And I didn't even think about that. But yeah, you're 100% right about that, JPT. Like, having those features that are super powerful just be inside of your phone as a base level, obviously that's smart. And Apple, I would say, is a pretty profitable company, right? So probably some good lessons to be learned there.
Yeah, because there's two parts of it, right? Like the advanced is I want to really go into this is the one button thing, but that's not necessarily everyone that's going to use this. Like, I think this game, especially new players getting into it, there's a lot going on within a particular class, and you can be a little lost trying to figure out exactly what I should be pressing. So even just using it as like as a guide to start learning your class and move off of it eventually, but just having a base understanding of what actually should I be doing at a base level of this.
That's really exactly the motivation on our end. I mean, especially with warbands and War Within, we see lots and lots more alts, and leveling is pretty quick. You got a bunch of Warbound until equipped gear that you're passing over to a new character, and just jumping into their full rotation. We've never played the spec seriously before, can be a pretty serious undertaking. And for some people, this may be enough for them, and that's fine too. But we recognize that there's so much. WoW has such a high skill ceiling that just recommending what the next ability isn't going to really remove that or fully solve that. There's still the muscle memory that you need to form, and then all of the nuances of, like, we might have a recommendation for a rotation that makes sense if you're fighting a target dummy, you're fighting patchwork, but when you need to plan around the fact that you're going to have to move in 4 seconds, that's a whole different layer of skill that still rests with players.
Yeah, I know when I'm trying to play a new spec for the first time or haven't played it in years, it often feels like I've got like a 30-minute checklist of, okay, I got to set up my keybinds, got to make sure, oh, this ability's changed since 2 expansions ago, I got to rebind that. And then I got to go and read some guides and figure out how all my new rotation works, and oh, here's how the new set bonus works. So I could see it being really nice to just have this is a way to jump in to some content to do with your friends and have it work out nice and easily. One thing that jumps out to me is that a lot of the content I'd want to
Good old Pop-Tart corn dog.
do would be like delves or keys. And in either of those cases, there's a lot of AoE.
Yeah.
Is this going to have are we going to detect whether we're fighting 3 targets, 5 targets, and is it going to cast my Arcane Explosion instead of my Arcane Blast, or is it just always going to be a single target?
It's not just single target. There is some sense of how many enemies are within your range, in front of you, etc. And so that will affect the recommendations. Again, the goal is not optimal. The goal is not like this is going to okay, everyone's always going to get perfect parses and so forth going forward. But as a baseline, this should be it should be useful the same way that many people find Hakili useful today. And really, a lot of this building on the foundations of the cooldown manager that just came out in 11.1.5 kind of reflects us hearing people in the community telling us that they feel like they need to seek out these third-party resources just to play the game at like a baseline effective level in competitive content. And us asking, is that where we want the game to be in the long term, and what can we do to build in native solutions to many of these problems?
Like the base.
It feels like what we're gearing up to get here is a complete Blizzard overhaul of the entire add-on system as a whole. The fact that they have implemented a new UI, now they're implementing this version of this Hakili add-on that allows you to learn how to play. I'm actually I like this a lot. I think that this has a lot of really positive connotations for the game as a whole. And the other thing that I keep thinking about over and over again, and maybe it's just because I personally am really excited about this, I cannot stop thinking about controller integration for something like this. Like, Activision obviously owns Blizzard, right? This game should be on Game Pass. WoW should go free to play. They have a ton of microtransactions in there, and you should be able to play this on the Xbox. Like, you should be able to play World of Warcraft on a game console, because that would be so good for our game. And an add-on like this that allows you to do like a 1-button rotation, that is what is going to make that super accessible on a controller. There should also be ways to map your own keys to a controller. I've done it before. It's called Console Port, I believe is the name of the add-on. And you can just set up all of your skills to a controller, and you can actually play your character like it's a camera over your back shoulder, kind of like in third-person view, with Action Cam. If you guys remember that, like Bellular did a pretty cool video series about that back in the day, kind of like turning your World of Warcraft character and experience into a third-person action RPG. Especially because a lot of the animations in retail are beautiful. They're super cool. But mapping all of your keys to your controller, it is really time intensive, but having an add-on like this in the game where you can literally hit one button, it makes it much more accessible. And I gotta believe that they're getting ready to do something with this
Construct of it There is a, this will help you learn what you're supposed to do if you are new. And then there is a, hey, I don't want to be the best player at this game. That's totally fine. I play it for a different reason. I want to collect things. I want to like understand the story. I want to quest. I want to level, right? And I don't want to feel like I can go into any content and I just don't really know what I'm doing. I feel anxious about that. Like you have the ability to just be like, okay, well at least Blizzard's got me. You know, I can have something at a base level where I can press one button and just kind of hang out and play the game. I have one question about the actual rotational thing. So is that going to like change with talent? So like, let's say, is it going to work off the base talent build, or let's say you select a talent that now moves a AoE button into your single target rotation? Is it going to be smart enough or planned to be smart enough to incorporate a bunch of different potential talent builds?
The goal is that it's aware of your talents, and the logic is conditional based on what you do or don't have talented. As with, this is going to be something that continues to evolve. We may not have every single possible permutation accounted for in the version that we roll out with, but it should still be very useful in that form to everyone, and we'll just get refined from there.
That's so damn easy to do in Classic, dude. Like, so simple to do in Classic.
Similar to the cooldown manager that we know is like, that is a first take at this. We have plans to add much more customization, much more functionality to that over time as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting feature individually. The thing that's most exciting to me is in the broader context of the cooldown manager, of all these other edit mode changes that have come out. There was a time 5 years ago in WoW where if you were just getting into the game, there was an intimidating list of these are the add-ons that you need, and if you're not using these, you're kind of worse, right? Like you're noticeably worse. If you can't track your group member's major cooldown, right? Like you're worse at Mythic Plus than somebody who is, right? And it seems like the goal that has been accomplished with a lot of these things that have been coming into the base UI is you can use those add-ons if you want, but we now have a native way to the game where you don't have to get an add-on.
That is pretty much exactly our long-term philosophical goal here, right? Like, add-ons are amazing. The things that the community has done over the last 20 years to allow people to experience different aesthetics, different functionality, have information available at their fingertips, like, that is a huge part of WoW's success, and we don't question or want to undermine that for a moment. At the same time, like as you said, ideally it is about what do you want? How do you prefer to have things presented to you, and not what do you have to do? What is a group mate or raid leader, whatever, telling you you must download? Or if you ask people, hey, how can I get better? I'm really struggling at this. The first answer shouldn't be, well, download this add-on, this add-on, and this add-on, otherwise you're doing it wrong. Because that's starting to get into that mandatory place, whether we like it or not. So
Yeah, I'm sure that Blizzard does feel like add-ons have been incredible for the community and for the game because it has essentially prevented Blizzard from having to develop their game properly. Like, why is it that we're 20 plus years into World of Warcraft and a UI editor just came out? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. Like, why is it that we're 20 plus years into the game and a substitution for Tell Me When or Weak Auras is just coming out? Why don't we have a damage meter in the game? Why isn't there a healing meter in the game? Like, all of this stuff is insane. The fact that this isn't available, it goes to show that like add-on developers have taken up this task, and it has made it so Blizzard doesn't have to continue to develop these aspects of their game. And who knows, like maybe they're putting that manpower to somewhere else, but it just kind of sucks because people shouldn't have to go outside of the game in order to get information about how to be better at the game. That sucks. And I'm not talking about like looking at guides. I'm talking about like things directly in your game that impact how good you are, cooldown trackers, and like what he was saying, like Omni CC and all of that stuff. Dude, I have all that stuff. I don't want to play with all these add-ons, but I'm a raid leader and I feel like I have to, because if I don't, I'm just like actively a more ineffectual like raid leader to my guild. And I don't want that to happen. So if it means that I have to play in a less optimal way for my enjoyment, but it's going to make us as a whole more effective as a raid, of course I'm going to make that trade. And you'd be a fool to not make that trade. But it does kind of suck.
Yeah, I think, longer term, these initiatives kind of fit into part of how we're thinking about the role of add-ons in WoW. As we can probably all agree, today there is a sense that if you want to really be the best you can, if you want to play competitive content, there are certain add-ons that are required, that are simply going to improve your success over not having them, period. We would like to get away from that being the case. I think I'd love to see a WoW one day where you can still customize the aesthetic look of your UI. You can have information and quest helpers and all the other things that you might want to have to make your experience a bit more seamless. But that at the end of the day, when you're in competitive content, when you're queuing up for a rated PvP match, when you're going into a high key, when you're trying to get a first kill on a raid boss, there isn't the sense that you are, just holding yourself back if you're not using specific tools. We know that there's a lot of work to do to get to a place where that could be the reality. The first steps really are going to be continuing to build up the just right out of the box functionality that World of Warcraft offers to shrink that gap. But at the same time, I think we're aware that at the very end of this process, we probably are going to have to rein in some of the functionality that add-ons currently have to do
Love
with
that.
real-time in-combat problem solving specifically, where it's like automating coordination, communication in ways that are always going to be better than anything the UI could natively provide you, as long as they remain possible.
Yes.
That is such a good thing for the game. That makes me so happy because like the idea that you need an add-on to clear a fight is stupid. Like no fight in the game should be designed that way. It's just dumb. And this is what I thought they were going to do, right? They're unveiling, and I said it earlier in the video. They're unveiling all of these different add-ons and stuff they're going to add to the game because they're wanting to give you an alternative to what you currently have, and then they're going to start taking away other stuff. And I think that is phenomenal for the game. Like the closer that we can all get to we're all on the same page and all on the same playing field as far as how we actually interact with the game and the information we have available to us, the better off the game is going to be. Like having these massive gaps between players because I clicked download add-on on CurseForge and you didn't is stupid. It's a bad design for a game.
So that moves us into like raid bosses where I don't want to name any names, but there are people who have optimized a little bit of their own fun out of the game sometimes. I don't know where any of them might be sitting. They could be anywhere. They could be in this room with us.
Hey man, I am the like number one. Let's just YOLO this. Let's just do the fight. Let's make it work. And then sometimes it gets to let's try to make something that could be 95% successful, 100 or 99, right? And there's a lot of frustration with the tech involved with that. I would definitely be. I think a lot of the rating community would be pretty for that. I think a well-designed mechanic that the game giving you enough information to solve this on your own realistically. A lot of the times the community will just use one because it's like what everyone else uses. It gets you in the same place. But if that doesn't exist and the game is giving you that information, it's objectively better, right?
And even if you are doing it very well, manually, it's always going to be better to do it perfectly in a competitive situation. I mean, having watched, your raid leading, for example, over many, many years over the Race to World First, like years ago, you would call much more stuff verbally.
Very
like
true.
going back to, Legion, BFA era, whereas nowadays it seems like if there is something you're calling repeatedly on attempts, the first thing you're doing is asking if, hey, can we automate this and get me out of the business of talking, which seems like it might be less enjoyable for you as a raid leader.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if we're talking about that, I could talk all day
Sure.
about that. Yeah. No. I felt like you certainly had more of an impact when you had the ability to, influence the fight more. But the reality is just getting some way to automate it for your players is just better.
It is.
It is funny. Like when I do that now, I think, what else can I be doing with my time? I could be like looking at other ways to optimize, and it's purely for the sake of getting better. So yeah, for my own enjoyment, yeah, that's sweet. Let's do that. I'm trying to wonder also about those kind of mechanics. So like what bosses have existed in my head, I think in the past couple of years, there's not many, but have been defined by when we're progressing this boss, we feel like maybe we're progressing a weak aura. Something like Brood Twister or Echo of Neltharion or Jailer maybe was one of the first ones, right? And those mechanics, I feel like, could not have been done or probably would have been nerfed without weak auras or having that effectiveness of that reduced. What do you do as a fight designer now? Do you I know you're obviously like really passionate about raiding. You've raided for a really long time. Do you have to avoid those kind of assignment mechanics? Are there things in game you can use to like naturally sort out those things? Like, do you give more time for the mechanics? Like do you have to stray away from assignments in general because the community has just, whether you like it or not, has like trained themselves to have something solve that for them? Do you have to like go back into like a more simple version of that? Do you find other ways to make fights difficult? There's obviously a bunch of ways to do that.
The way we design.
That's a really fascinating question, and it's a important. I'm really interested to hear what Ian says about this because the philosophy of game design is going to hinge on this. Currently, right now in retail, from what I understand, and I don't play retail, but a lot of the fights, from what I understand, are designed around the idea that you're going to have weak auras and all these different add-ons to help you through the fight. And if they didn't exist, if those add-ons and stuff didn't exist, then they wouldn't design the fights this way. They wouldn't, tune the fights to this extent. Um, and that's another problem. Like mythic rating, and I understand there's like a community of people for it. It's out of control. Like it is so far past the pale. And I know that this is a take that a lot of people don't like, but having one difficulty of rating is one of the things that makes classic really, really good. I understand we're not going back to that in retail. Honestly, I think retail is at a place at this point where like classic players are probably never going back to retail. And that's fine, right? Like there can be two different versions of the game, and in particular when we get Classic Plus. Do you hear that I said what I said when we get it? Because that's the highest level of copium you can get. But like not only are these difficulties like way out of tune, but like they require so much third party support that if you're not someone who's aware of these things, you're never clearing the content. Like it's never going to happen. Hire the developers of the most used add-ons. They probably have other ideas the game could benefit from that they just don't have the time to work on. 100% agree with you. 1000%. This is one of the things that Blizzard's not good at. I don't know if it's because of hubris or if there's like a business decision behind it. Obviously, we can't pretend to understand the inner workings of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but the fact that Blizzard didn't hire the Nostalrius dev team to help them with the classic launch in 2019 was so stupid. It was like so obviously a dumb move. If only to get community support like from us because they were taking on our quote unquote our guys. Why not just do it? It's just dumb not to. Hiring these guys who have developed these add-ons is such a no-brainer. It's such a no-brainer. You're going to get all the stuff they worked on. Plus, additionally, exactly what JPT is saying, you're going to get their inner ideas too that they maybe haven't come to light yet. Maybe they don't have development time, but Blizzard does. I've been saying this about Turtle WoW as well as we move closer to getting to Classic Plus and Turtle WoW being as successful as it's been for a private server, which is not like crazy, right? It's still a private server at the end of the day. It's still not huge numbers, but a lot of stuff they've done has been really well received and it's super cool. And Blizzard would do well to pay attention to what they are doing and let's say take inspiration from those projects that they have going. That's what the Blizzard of old used to do. They didn't reinvent anything. They just took genres that already existed, basically took games that already existed and just made it their own. Like Blizzard was the best at stealing stuff. It's why Riot is such a successful game company right now. They do the exact same thing. Like, oh, this is sick. We'll put our own IP in it. And it works out so well, right? Blizzard needs to go back to being inspired by other sources. Bring those people in, give them some money.
Design encounters has been influenced in significant ways by the way players use add-ons. I know, the community sometimes speculates that, this was built clearly to require an add-on. I can say that's never the case. No encounter designer is ever sitting around saying, all right, we're going to make this mechanic and then players will write this weak order to solve it this way. All right, mission accomplished, let's ship the boss. But when we're thinking about the overall pacing of a fight, the tuning, we might get feedback on a fight that it feels like there isn't enough going on, when in actuality there are 4 or 5 mechanics going on, but add-ons are largely compartmentalizing and making it so that most players don't have to think about them most of the time. And then players give us feedback that, hey, this fight felt a little bit slow, like I was just punching the boss for 3 minutes. And so then maybe we add another mechanic in the next iteration of that or a similar encounter. We get to a higher overall complexity space where, there's just, you look at the dungeon journal and you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and maybe half of it doesn't even matter because add-ons are going to handle it for you. I think that's not a great place for things to land. It also definitely ties our hands in some ways. Like, I think we do fewer coordination mechanics than we used to. Like, there used to be, like, if you look at old school WoW days, there were encounters where, like, the primary challenge for your raid was by design coordinating some rotation. And the execution beyond that wasn't super complicated, but making sure that this thing stayed soaked or that you were rotating people through with their debuff or whatever, that became a big part of the fight's challenge. Now we know ultimately that that can never be the thing that we lean on for challenge because it's going to be solved and it's not going to be solved.
Yeah, the thing that immediately comes to mind for something like that, of course, is Loatheb and Nax, right? Where every healer can heal, I don't know, what is once every minute or something like that. You get to do 1 heal. I forget how long the debuff is because in Nax, in Wrath of the Lich King, and in Nax and Sod, it operates completely differently. And I've never healed that fight anyway in original classic. I was the main tank, but that's an example of like what what you used to do sometimes is you'd like put all your healers in a separate Discord channel and they would communicate, okay, I'm healing now, okay, I'm healing now. And now what you do is there's just an add-on that tells you when it's your turn to heal. That's all you have to do. And so that's a good example of like they're avoiding these coordination mechanics because add-ons just automate all of the skill out of that entire mechanic. So that makes total sense. And those, I feel like those mechanics are cool because they make you work with your raid. Those should be a part of the game.
Through what we think of as the more just interesting MMOE, like communication, cooperation, figuring out systems for having these things work in a way that feels collaborative. It's going to be downloading the weak aura pack, setting it up appropriately, maybe having 3 or 4 frustrating wipes because there was a typo in the configuration, which is like, that's not what I think anyone really wants raiding to be. And so we move away from making those mechanics as much and lean more on things that add-ons can't solve for you, like moving out of a swirly under your feet with only a little bit of time to respond. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that more and more of our fights have those sorts of just like twitch reaction avoidance mechanics, whereas that used to be one type of fight that we did. The design space is definitely constrained by the knowledge that, if we lean on it too heavily, it's just going to get trivialized.
Some of my favorite WoW raid boss memories are bosses like Mythic Unat, Mythic Anduin. You have to spread out and then you get these marks and you have to go to the right places. And there used to be definitely a library of mechanics like that where you would get them and then you'd have to think and you'd have to have like a system and you'd have to have 20 players sort of coordinate and become one team that does a mechanic like that. And the fact now that add-ons take on much of that job of coordinating us, I think that almost all the Mythic Raiders I know would be delighted to move back to a world where we did that in our brains, right? But in Dragonflight, we saw a little bit of an attempt to make that happen, right, with the private aura system. And what ended up happening was we still had the weak aura, but now we also have a macro that we need to press, and then the weak aura will assign us the same thing. So I'm a little bit worried. How's the arms race between the weak aura devs trying to come up with a new way around the restriction that you're putting in? Is this just a further escalation in that?
Hopefully not. I think our goal here is kind of disarmament and definitely not further escalation. I think we understand that if we're not going to try more little targeted things like that are going to encourage workarounds and it just ends up with this back and forth. Because yeah, if there is a way to solve a complex mechanic, but you have to jump through a couple of more hoops to do so, you'll do that, right, and then just be more annoyed by the process. Our goal is to try to get out of that space entirely, and so I think down the line eventually that may mean I think some broader restrictions on specifically what information add-ons have access to about combat events in real time. At the same time, we know that that's not a thing that we could just do right now without providing a lot more on our end, both in terms of just UI type functionality, but also looking at how we're designing some encounters, how some of our classes work. I think there are tons of add-ons that are healthy and valuable and really important to how players play the game that do rely on that flow of information. Everything from something as simple as damage meters to honestly boss time, like ability timelines, like the DBM style, like when is this next ability going to fire that people have basically been raiding with forever. That's not the computational weak auras. That's just, hey, this ability is going to happen in 15 seconds. Like, we want to build in our own version of that. I think down the line, we'd love to see a place where there is a boss timeline as just part of the encounter UI. And that's not something you need an add-on for. And that way we can hopefully eventually get to a point where we're really just cutting out the weak aura that solves the mechanic for you, but not the informational stuff that you feel like, it really feels like the game should have been telling you all along, where add-ons are admittedly, kind of filling in some gaps there.
Okay,
so that was a really interesting question. Basically, what he asked was, there seems to be this arm race between Raiders and Blizzard. So when Blizzard, from what I understand, they made it so that the API wouldn't have access to all of this information. And what I'm extracting from this is they would create a macro that would then send it to the weak aura, and then the weak aura would be able to update with the relevant information, something to that effect, right? That's obviously bad, and that is a reaction to Blizzard's action of trying to limit the flow of information, and they're superseding that by, hey, push this button and then you get the information. That's not good. Players and the devs being in a perpetual arms race of add-ons versus fights is something that's been going on for a very long time, and it needs to end. Furthermore, I didn't even think about it, but add-ons like Bigwigs and DBM, why is that not just a part of the game? Like, not only the fact that none of this information is available to a new player is insane. Like, dude, think of all of the barriers to entry you have as a World of Warcraft player. Dude, there's like 60 different abilities you got to learn. You have no idea what your right rotation is supposed to be. You have no idea where your talents are. And I'm just thinking of classic, right? My version of the game. You have no idea where your talents are supposed to be, what gear you're supposed to wear, what buffs you're supposed to get, what consumables you should have, what food you should be eating. Like, you have no idea any of this stuff. And then you get into a raid finally and you're dying to stuff and you're like, I didn't even know that was going to happen. Just put the freaking boss timers in the game. Blizzard obviously has access to them. They made the fights. It's actually crazy that something like DBM should so obviously be baseline in the game, and it should be turned on by default. And if you want to turn it off, you should have to go in, click it off. A warning should pop up and say, "Are you sure you want to turn this off? You will no longer have access to boss timers in raids," and then you should have to hit yes. Like, that should obviously be a thing that's in the game. But I will say it's good that they realize that this is the case. And hopefully a lot of this stuff makes its way over to Classic, because Classic is a simple version of the game that's really just an entirely knowledge-based system. And giving players more knowledge is a net gain. And I speak from experience as a raid leader and as a GM. I want more people being good at the game. Desperately want that.
Coming in 11.1.7, we're going to have the rotation helper, those two options. What of the rest of this initiative, is any of the rest of this in 11.1.7, or are we just starting the conversation now?
I think there's a lot of stuff that we're working on. I think, we've seen the cooldown manager and then the rotation assist coming. I think down the line, it's some of the stuff that I touched on. I don't have specific patch dates right now, but we are looking at damage meters. We're looking at nameplate improvements. We are looking at, like a raid encounter information.
Literally all the stuff I talked about in the video, right? Like, it's so good that Blizzard has their pulse on the game like this. It's a really, really good sign, guys. Like, we should be very happy to hear Ian talking like this.
Presentation that shows you timeline of boss abilities coming up, things in that general space. I think we're looking at all the places where players say right now, you need this weak aura, you need this add-on to be competitive, and asking ourselves, like, how do we change our game to make that not the case? And some of that's going to be add-on functionality, or UI functionality. Other aspects are going to be looking at how we're building some encounters or how some class mechanics work. Like, I think it's super fair to point at some specs, like, let's say Outlaw Rogue, who I know are easy one to pick on in some of these ways, and ask, like, how is anyone really supposed to execute this perfectly with the base UI? Almost any time we're tracking like stacks of a buff, and you need to make a decision where it's like, if you're between 4 and 7 stacks, you should do this, otherwise don't. Those are not reasonable tests for us to be posing to our players without providing them the information to do it correctly. And so we need to either provide the information, simplify the mechanic, or both.
There are a lot of players.
He said that so well. I completely agree with everything he just said. When you have rotational stuff like Unholy Death Knight and Wrath of the Lich King sticks out at me, like trying to track and pre-pot and pre-pop 100 different cooldowns is like so, and there were add-ons to automate it all, right? Like, but trying to do that is so insane. And then like even on something in retail as simple as BM, where you have your barb shots that are increasing your pet's attack speed, and you can have 3 stack, and BM's like the easiest spec in the game, right? And you can have 2 stacks almost all the time, but getting to 3 stacks you can't, but then you're waiting for resets. It's like, dude, if you don't have something that is actively displaying that information to you, you're just never going to be able to do it right. And I'm not even necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but there should be a way for you to get access to that information natively in the game. I'm glad that they know that, and I'm glad they're making changes towards that in the right direction. Also, spell activation overlay is awesome. If you guys don't have that add-on in Classic, you should download it. What it does is it imports a lot of the retail functionality to proc-based events that happen in the game. So, for example, when you have Sword and Board on as a warrior and your Shield Slam resets, like 2 bright glowy things will pop up on either side of your character, and it will just let you know, hey, Shield Slam has been reset. It's time to use it again. Stuff like that is good, and it looks cool. It's a welcome addition to the game. I really like things like that.
Players who love the version of Outlaw Rogue that it has existed over the past few years. So I think.
Oh, what do we got here? How did that happen? Did I turn that? Let's see. Dude, I turned that off when we were all turning off add-ons for raid FPS, and I griefed myself for the first few bosses. Yeah, because you got to have it on. It sucks. It super sucks. That's a whole other thing. Is like, if you get into the conversation of how add-ons decrease performance in the game, but you feel like you have to use them anyway to, properly play your class, that's a whole other conversation of like, hey, this is not fun anymore. But yeah, it's like if you don't have these, you're just not going to beat me. If I have access to all my add-ons and you don't, it's not like you're just not going to win. I don't care how good you are at the game. And granted, like I am one of the, I will for sure say, like I am one of the best prot warriors in the world in Classic. But like if I have access to my add-ons and you don't, it's not even a competition. It doesn't even matter if I'm good or not. Like I just have access to more information than you do. So
there's always some fear when this discussion starts up of, is the answer going to be to simplify everything? And I think it's really exciting to hear instead that the answer is, okay, we'll maybe simplify some of these huge outliers, but we're going to bring in the functionality that makes it so that instead of needing to download a WeakAura to solve this, right, instead of needing to have a complicated assistant tell you, now you're supposed to press this button, now you're supposed to press this button, instead we're going to provide that information in a more clear way than looking at the top right of your screen to see your buffs and trying to catch the rotation buff between all the other 20 that are changing in combat.
That's definitely the goal. I think we want World of Warcraft to be as approachable as possible, but we also love that the skill ceiling in the game is as incredibly high as it is. That allows for tons of differentiation and self-expression and accomplishment. But I think a lot of, at its core, a lot of skill in WoW I think boils down to multitasking ability, and like even just you might be able to do amazing damage just testing it against a target dummy. Very different world when you're also in an encounter and need to do 3 mechanics at the same time. And we see, tunnel visioning DPS are a meme for a reason, right? They're just focused on their rotation, and whoops, they just messed up the encounter mechanic, or vice versa. Someone who is good at mechanics, but their DPS goes off a cliff. Really, like the function of a lot of these add-ons is to offload a portion of that computational complexity. And we recognize, like, if we are removing some of that functionality, we're providing more information, we can probably remove a couple of mechanics, but still keep the same level of challenge. The goal is not to make it easier. The goal is to make it less complex. And I think that's, I think it's a key distinction there, because I think it often can sound like, oh, this is about, this might be about dumbing down the game or simplifying things. It's not that. It's about trying to create a more approachable baseline experience that still has every bit as much room for differentiation.
When you're talking.
That is a very interesting point you just brought up. So it is easy to conflate the idea of something being easier and something being less complex. And a lot of times when something becomes less complex, it does maybe get easier, but the two things are not synonymous with one another. I'm obviously a martial artist, and so the first thing that I thought of is when you're defending a choke, right? It's very simple. Like, you want your hands to be on top of their hands. If your hands are on top of the other person's hands when they're trying to choke you, for the most part, you'll be okay. If your hands get underneath, you're going to be in trouble. So that's not complicated. It's not complex at all. Keep your hands in this position and you'll be fine, right? But it's actually really difficult to do against someone who's trying to choke you, right? And especially someone who has got a really, really good, back take and a really good choke game. It's not complex, but it's not easy. In WoW, I feel like in retail, it seems like when I watch these videos, a lot of it seems like there's massive ability bloat on these bosses. So tuning down the complexity of like how much stuff is going on is a good thing, and you can still keep a lot of the same difficulty, especially if players don't have access to all of the same information that they had previously. I think that's a really important distinction that they're making there.
Talking about add-ons that things have been in the game, been inspired by it. You mentioned a damage meter.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in just what your view is philosophy-wise about damage meters in games like this.
Yeah, the skill ceiling will still be there. It's just the floor will be higher, which is good for the game. Completely agree with you 100%. Like in classic, the gap between players is so high. Like you'll have players who I'm like, is this even a person playing this game? Like there's no way that you are a living, breathing person, right? And then you have players that are like, how in the hell are you doing this much damage with this class? Like it doesn't even make sense. And good DPS will do that, right? Like good DPS will seemingly get numbers from like, where is this coming from? And bad players, you're like, do you even have a pulse? Like maybe it's okay, right? For there to be a really high skill ceiling, but the floor being that low is not really good for the game. So yeah, I agree. He just asked Ian his thought process on damage meters. I'm really interested to hear his take on this. Sometimes pug raids make me afraid to drive. 1000%, dude. Those people could be next to you on the highway, bro. I never thought about that. That is, ugh. The same people who can't get out of a circle are navigating their vehicle at 75 miles an hour down the interstate next to my wife and children. Ugh.
That's a great question, and I think ultimately we have to be guided by what our community prefers and what we see them doing today. The single most popular add-on used across the entire game is a damage meter by like a fair margin.
Okay.
The majority of players, the large majority of players, have a damage meter add-on installed, and so that indicates that people want to see that information at least about themselves. We definitely want more nuanced measures of success and understanding, like how successful were you or how much did you contribute on this run, highlighting things like interrupts, highlighting things like avoidable damage to give a fuller picture of performance. But at the end of the day, I think for someone who's trying a new spec, trying a new talent build, getting a new trinket, and they want to see like how did this affect my performance compared to the last run, that's an important piece of information to have. And so I think we know that in any world where we were going to limit some of the ability of add-ons to, like, again, do that real-time combat event tracking, we would need to provide a damage meter solution of our own. And I think one of the exciting things is, I think if we're doing that on our end, we can also have it be server authoritative, so you're not worried about like who's in a different combat phase, who's out of range or whatever.
Yeah.
It could just be like, this is official and going to be accurate all the time.
We're obviously
That is it's a good point that he brings up. Like you're playing a new spec or a new character, one of the issues with not having a native damage meter in the game is that people will be bad and they don't even know they're bad, right? Because they're so new to the game that they don't even know about going to get add-ons, and so they can't look at you doing 7,000 DPS and then they can't see them doing 1,000 DPS, because if you saw that, you'd go, "Whoa, hold on, I suck. Like, why am I doing so much?" You might even just ask the question, "Why are you doing so much more than me?" Which can then obviously spur on the conversation of how to improve. They don't even know that they're lacking behind, or they don't even know how far behind they are, because they don't even have the ability to get the information to let them know that they're that far behind. It truly is the Pareto distribution in action, right? To those who have everything, more will be given. To those who have nothing, everything will be taken. We see this all the time, right? We have a very small percentage of people that control the vast majority of the wealth in the world, and you have a very small minority of players, and they are like incomprehensibly better than the lower bottom tier level of players, and that is not necessarily a great thing for the game. There's also the argument to be made that damage meters are really toxic, and I think Final Fantasy 14 has gone this route where I believe they don't allow damage meters. I think you can still get them if you like run a web page while you play the game, I think is what people have told me. But I think the idea behind that is that and I believe it's like against TOS in their game to link damage meters, and obviously in Classic WoW that's something that we do all the time, and probably in retail too. But the idea that the game is toxic because people are going to see that you're bad, and then like that's going to be a negative thing for the game. Like for sure, it's not a great thing if someone's being like really rude and saying you suck so bad, look at your damage. That's not great, right? But if it's like you can't not have a feature because some people are going to abuse it when it's overall a positive thing for the game. You get banned if you bring them up in Final Fantasy 14 you're talking about. Yeah. That's I get it. That's a pretty harsh punishment for telling someone they're bad at the game is just you getting banned, but I don't know, maybe it makes a more happier social cohesive experience. Not what I want in my game. I want to be able to tell someone if they're being bad. Mostly it's my friends and guildies, but whatever.
Mostly thinking about Mythic Raid when our brains go to how this is going to affect things, but the overwhelming majority of players are in heroic raids, normal raids, raid finder raids, doing Mythic Plus dungeons, right? When we're talking about making these changes to what weak auras can do, is there an appetite for changing how heroic and normal raids function as well? Like, do we see these problems in there as well for what add-ons can do and how they solve things?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it all trickles down, right? I mean, I think maybe even more a larger percentage of players doing Mythic Raid might use specific weak aura packs than, let's say, normal.
It's funny. I was just going to say this is a bigger problem for heroic, normal, and LFR raiders than it is for mythic raiders. Dude, if you're a mythic raider, you have the add-ons. Like, you're a good player. You know what's going on. Except Briggy. He's not a good player, and he pretends to be a mythic raider. But the majority of other players that are playing mythic, minus my cousin, are pretty good players. And like, they're going to have access to all of this information anyway. People who are doing freaking LFR and normal, they're not going to, right? Like, a lot of those people probably don't have these add-ons. And so it's like, they say, the old saying is, when the rich get a cold, the poor die of pneumonia. It's kind of one of those situations where, like, this is a small problem for these really high, like, really good players. This is a massive problem for the guys down here, right? It's like it's not even comparable how much this is affecting these guys versus these guys. It's a totally different thing. I should take a shot every time Ian raises his shoulders and just passes. Just pass out. Rank 60 shaman, by the way. Yeah, we're all really glad that you got to level 60 on a shaman, buddy. Rank 60? I know you're not talking about number 60 in the world. There's no way that's possible. No one plays that class, by the way. It sucks.
But those add-ons are used by the majority of players right now, and certainly other, boss mods are as well. And I think a lot of it just comes down to, what are the coordination challenges that we're presenting? If there's something that everyone is relying on a tool right now to assist with, we would have to change it to still keep it the same level of challenging, but without that same automation assistance. And that can take many forms. It can be there's one or two fewer things to soak. You have an extra couple of seconds to actually spread out on the fly. It's a pretty common mechanic of all right, 3 people get a debuff and they just have to run out in different directions from each other. People have been just kind of playing the game and doing those for years and years. But of course, if you can if the time you're given to react is so tight that you can't afford to do that, then people do gravitate towards, all right, we're going to put diamond, circle, and triangle on the ground. Everyone's going to get an auto-assigned marker, and you just know, I'm going to run to my marker to guarantee that it's executed correctly. I think it's a bit more interesting if we give you a couple of seconds so that you can look around and make sure you're not running in the same direction, and then do the exact same thing. I mean, at the end of the day, raiding in particular, but group PvE, group PvP too. In an MMO, a huge portion of, I think, the fun of it is just coordination, communication, feeling like everyone's working together to overcome some challenge in front of them. And I think getting back into a space where there's room for more of that organic collaboration, as opposed to it just being regimented and solved by an external tool, I think will open up a lot of design avenues for the game going forward.
It's always a good thing when you feel like you're working together with your raid to accomplish something as opposed to it being automated. That's a good feeling, I think to Wrath of the Lich King, just because I played it kind of recently, the last boss in TOGC, is it a Nubarak? A Nubercon? One of those Anub guys, right? And they have that ability, like that piercing cold ability or whatever it's called, where it goes on 4 random members of your raid, and you have to heal those people, and they have to be spot healed. And the way that it would work with the add-on is, or maybe it was 5, I think it was 5 people, and you'd have 4 healers, right? And what you would do is there was a weak aura that every time somebody got that debuff, it would put a number on them So like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, then I would say, okay, your job is to heal the person with a 1. Your job is to heal a person with a 2, and you got 3 and 4, and then I got 5. And then we all just heal that person. And there's not really a whole lot of collaborative effort there because I'm just telling you, like, hey, this is your number. As opposed to like, hey, you get group 1, you get group 2, I'll get group 3, you get group 4. Um, and then if there's multiple people in, like, let's say group 2 gets 2 of them, I yell out, I'm getting this person. And then you get the other one, right? There's more like involvement from your raid when you have to come up with solutions like that, as opposed to an add-on that's just like assigning you a number to heal a target. It doesn't feel as good when you down those fights.
Throughout the last couple years, especially in Mythic Plus, that had been ramping in complexity, you've seen, and actually even if you can go back, like you can see the amount of things that people have in their UI to help them know that something's happening. So like back in Power Auras, it was, you know, there was just some giant, some giant face on your screen would pop up, and that meant that something procced. And then it's gotten more, you know, refined. And now, even in the last, it's been ramping in the past couple of years. You see like, you listen to someone's POV who's doing High Mythic Plus right now. You're going to hear AoE, dodge, frontal, circle. Yep. Like it's just every bit of audio aid they've used to, you know, it's in the idea of being optimal. It's not required. And especially this patch, I think Mythic Plus complexity has actually gone down as an intentional design point, it seems at least. I think you might have made a post about that. So that stuff is less required, but people have like kind of already baked down the UI. Is that something that you're looking to either have an ability to have that in the game, or is that something you don't want to have happen, where it's more like you're organically doing mechanics because you see them, or are you okay with all of the audio and visual aids that exist currently within add-ons?
An interesting question because it really leads into like accessibility for maybe gamers that are you know, have some type of disability where these things would really help them a lot. I would really hate to see Blizzard shy away from this.
I think the answer is mixed there. I think like audio prompts are something that are super valuable to people. That's something we want to continue to add support for on our end as well. Like we know we've got feedback we've gotten around the 11.1.5 cooldown manager would be that many people would appreciate being able to have audio prompts tied to certain things or procs firing, and that's something they would miss about weak auras. We want to make sure that we're offering that kind of thing as well. Beyond that, I think a lot of what we've seen is, frankly, us not doing a sufficiently good job of telegraphing the importance of certain mechanics and their impact, and players needing to come up with solutions for them externally.
I'm again, and I know I've said it a bunch of times, I'm so happy to hear them saying this kind of stuff, because if you don't know that a problem exists, you can't solve it, right? And the fact that they are aware and willing to admit openly to the player base that like we do have this problem and it's not good, the player base has solved it for us, which in turn has made it so that Blizzard doesn't have to focus on the problem at all because there's a band-aid over it. It's just nice that they know that and they need to come back and fix it. It makes me really happy, and it makes me feel like there's not like this huge divide between what the player base is thinking and what Blizzard is thinking. It's good.
Ideally, there's a concept that we call affordance, which is basically just what is, like, how well is something telegraphed? How intuitive is it with visual presentation? And ideally, the affordance of a mechanic should match its impact. And sometimes, yeah, if you have a random mob in a dungeon pack that has a frontal that will just delete you if you're not getting out of the way of it, and it's just one thing going on among a half dozen other things, why? And why? Like, how could we call that out better? With visuals, with a longer cast time, with how we're creating the pack in the first place. And that's just one example of one of the areas in which we know we can do better. Something else we've talked about on the UI front is we would want the ability to, on our end, flag mob casts in Mythic Plus as like lethal, as like this should be a high priority interrupt, because we know players are going to basically look to solve that anyway. If there are 3 casters in a pack, and 2 of them, it's actually kind of okay to let them free cast, but one of them, if they ever get a cast off, you're probably going to wipe. They shouldn't all just look indistinguishable on your screen, and us expect you to figure that out on your own.
They did that in season 1, right? Wasn't there like a couple casts, or like super giga you die death volley or something?
Yeah.
And they had this big
It's
animation.
The Arcara casters where they hunker down, there's green glowy stuff around them, and they're casting a volley, and you're like, all right, I gotta kick
You
that.
could be playing WoW for 2 days, and you're like,
That's not happening,
that can't happen. Yes.
But I'm looking.
That is such a cool solution to that problem. And it's something I didn't even think of, but a lot of these issues can be solved not just through the use of additional add-ons, but just the game design as a whole in general. Like, dude, if a mob starts glowing green like that and they're doing like a 10-second cast, you should probably interrupt that cast, right? That doesn't look the same as something getting ready to cast a shadow bolt, right? Like that is a noticeable, like that's a dangerous thing. You need to interrupt it. That's cool. That's really cool design, and that's the kind of thing that Blizzard needs to be doing more of. And again, it makes me happy that they are doing this, and it's really good for the future of Classic Plus too, because we're going to get a lot of these design philosophy changes that they're implementing in retail into our new version of Classic. A touchy subject. If the audio cues are too good, they will also be required. There's not a single Fortnite Pro that uses the deaf disability on-screen feature. Yeah, you're probably right. So hold on. If the audio cues are too good, they will also be required. Yeah. That doesn't use. Okay, got it. That doesn't use. I was kind of confused by the way you said that. So there's not a single pro that doesn't use. Yeah, I mean you're right for sure. But this is the thing, and this is sort of what I was saying earlier, right? I understand that people are going to use them that don't need them, but not having them in the game when there's a section of the community who absolutely relies on them to play, I don't think that's the move, right? Because then those people can't play at all. And that sucks because there's already a lot of stuff those people don't get to do. And gaming should not be on the list of things that they don't get to engage with, right? Gaming should be accessible for everybody. At least, we should make that to some extent. But yeah, I agree. Just a touchy subject. It is for sure a touchy subject, but it's another one of those things that I don't think that, people abusing the system should mean that we don't have the system to begin with. The upside is so high.
Looking forward to an M plus then, where if we're talking about maybe taking away my ability to air horn myself on a certain cast, something like that, if instead I have to be now looking at a mob and there is a sort of a visual language that I can come to expect, like if the mob is hunkering down and it's got particle effects around it, that means I got to kick it. I think that would be more fun for everybody as well, rather than having the air horns be the solution.
Yeah, if the mob is gathering a spirit bomb above its head, you should probably kick that.
Definitely.
That is entirely our hope, right? I think, and just to be super clear, I think we see the taking away part, the restricting functionality, as the end of this long road. I think we know, we want to make it very clear, we're not sitting here being like, all right, we want you to play the game the way we intended, and we're going to take away your tools. We just want to bridge that gap. And we have a lot of work to do on our end to keep building up more improvements, more functionality. And it's not just the UI. The VFX changes that you mentioned are a part of that overall effort of us asking, what are the places where players feel like they need add-ons to succeed? Why is that the case? And when it's like, it's not clear when you're standing in something, and so I need, GTFO or some other, sound effect to let me know that I'm standing in something lethal, it should be obvious. Let's fix that on our end. And we know we want to keep chipping away at those things and hopefully eventually get to a point where really the only difference between what we are offering and what powerful add-ons can do is that small subset of like computational problem-solving stuff, at which point we can move forward.
So
to be fair, players are terrible. They'll have GTFO downloaded. They'll be standing in a giant patch of fire. It'll be screaming at them, and they'll still tunnel vision and die in it. So I don't know if this is necessarily just an add-on problem. This is also an IQ problem. And unfortunately, a good half of the community in Classic WoW is failing the test.
throughout the evolution of private auras, we've seen, initially when they came out, they were like kind of, a lot of friction was involved. And then I think they were done really, really well in a couple of cases, starting in Amir Drasil, where they were a mechanic like P1 Fire Act. You had the circles you had to quickly spread out for. They were pretty fast, but they were too fast to use a macro for it. And it basically forced the players into something they would have used a weak aura for, to just do the mechanic normally. And like, are there lessons you've learned there of like, this is actually how we can design mechanics or kind of assignment things going forward? And then also, is this, if done successfully, would this also remove private auras as what would have been, I guess, kind of a temporary solution to the weak aura problem?
Yeah, we've definitely learned a lot from how private auras have rolled out. Certainly we understand that if we're ever using it on something that like is on a long enough time frame that macros are going to let you solve it and it's punishing enough to not solve it, all we're doing is creating an extra annoying hoop to jump through, and we like hotfixed off the private aura designation from some of those back in Amir Drasil, and we've let that shape how and where we use or don't use it going forward. And so yeah, I think examples like the Furak mechanic that you mentioned are ones where like when we know that everyone is in a level playing field, everyone just has to play the game, play the mechanic. We can tune it accordingly so that it's hard but doable. We'd like to be able to do more of that for sure.
Yeah, I see the Fyrakk first intermission, which was a private aura and then had to get hotfixed off of the private aura, as sort of a cautionary tale for if there's a mechanic that is only doable with the weak aura assignments, and then we take away that without giving an adequate replacement, then it's worse than doing nothing at all. What would a mechanic like that look like in a world where we don't have a computational solution to it, right? Would it be slower and fewer sets of like lower damage numbers on these things?
I think probably a bit of all of that. There's multiple knobs there. There's, on Mythic we might default to like everyone in today's world, everyone in the raid has to participate in this, and there's enough things to be soaked that if anyone isn't doing it, it's not going to work out. Versus maybe shifting to a world where there's a little bit more slush, things are a little bit slower, there's a little bit more time to react, to get into place organically based on which buff you were assigned, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, our goal here is to preserve challenge, and we know that we'd have to design encounters differently in some cases to deliver roughly the same level of challenge in terms of how many pull counts it takes, just what progression looks like, while living in a different mechanical world. And I know that when we talk about restricting any kind of add-on functionality, many players very rightly, kind of reflexively say or ask, well, how am I supposed to do this boss in this tier without my weak aura? That would be impossible. And the reality is, if you couldn't use that weak aura, that mechanic would be designed or tuned differently. We would have ended up nerfing it right away or designing it differently over the course of even just PTR testing. And so that's like any future design in this space will have to be built from the ground up with that in mind. And I think it's making it a little bit more forgiving in a way that makes the challenge human rather than superhuman, as it often is when we're looking at like cutting edge mythic tuned things. Because you guys are really good at the game, as it turns out, and we want to make a boss that is going to pose a challenge and is going to take you dozens of attempts, let alone 100+ to beat. We do have to take into account the fact that not just you, but every Mythic raid guild that's going to follow in your footsteps are going to be using these tools. And at the end of the day, I think players do want challenging bosses. That if we just tuned the boss around none of those things, players used all those tools, and they went in and like a late Mythic boss was dying in a single night for like a cutting edge guild, rank 500 or whatever, that probably doesn't match what they're looking to get out of Mythic raiding. In my estimation. And so like our goal is to keep the same overall level of challenge while paring down the complexity a little bit.
Even if you look at the history of bosses, this sort of
It's interesting because I know that players are going to get upset about add-on functionality being removed or being changed in the game, but I feel like the high-end players, like the high-end Mythic players, are not going to care because I think they're going to be able to kill the bosses no matter what. And I think the lower end players, like maybe AOTC players or certainly normal raiders or a lot of classic players, are going to be really pissed off because they don't have access to these things. And when I say classic players, I'm specifically talking about people who just want to parse, right? Because that's a whole another section of the community. And don't get me wrong, I'm a part of this community a little bit. Like I was rank 1 Prot Warrior through most of Nax in the 40-man bracket, but man, it's I don't know. There's also another subgroup of people in Classic that are like, hey, let's do no add-ons. And I would love to. I've actually even played with the idea of, what if in our guild we made it a rule you're not allowed to use add-ons, or these are the approved add-ons, and if you use anything other than this, you're not allowed to raid with us, right? And it would sort of just be an honor system, right? It wouldn't be like a massive deal, but I just think it would be more fun. I think the game would just be better, and I think it'd be a lot more enjoyable if your screen wasn't filled up just with a bunch of shit on it all the time. Then again, to your point, if there's good enough audio queue, it would remove the need for audio weak auras, which is big. That's definitely true. Random thought: hire celebrities to voice act their own baked-in DBM so you can pick between Scarlett Johansson Samuel L. Jackson, Morgan Freeman, etc. They're owned by Microsoft. They have the money. That would be crazy. Scarlett Johansson telling me to move out of stuff would be great. I'll take that all day. Can you imagine a Samuel L. Jackson one? Soak, motherfucker.
affected. You actually, even looking at Mythic Plus, something where the complexity has gone down from pack to pack in this patch, but the reality is you can still find challenge in it because it's infinitely scaling, and there you will get to a point where it's doing too much damage to you, or the amount of damage you need to do is too high. There's been Mythic bosses that have been simple mechanically, but have been unbelievably difficult, and that's been true all the way down the guild ranks. It's not something that's just nerfed by gear, like Sludge Fist, Kaiveza, where you've created really intricate problems to solve where weak auras basically didn't matter. Halandris, you actually put a bomb timer very clearly in the game around the bomb. You did not need a weak aura for one of the hardest bosses ever, right? It's more just basically the solution for these weak auras has been just a very specific kind of assignment mechanic that is just like, oh, it's just so much easier to do this, right? You could build in a lot of that computational stuff in game to where even if weak auras existed, you would find people just being like, I don't know, the game just kind of does it. We have players that don't use audio sounds in weak aura packs because on bosses like Skarn, on most other bosses, there's like either an in-game sound for when the bombs are actually activating, or a voice line. We have 2 players in our guild that use very minimal weak auras, and they literally listen to voice lines for when mechanics are going to happen, and it's extremely accurate, right? So I think a lot of these things are already built into the baseline game. It's just about choosing like when and how to apply them.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think your example, going back to Nathria of Sludge Fist, I think is a great one, right? Like a lot of that was just practice and just learning like how to react to these situations when chained to different partners and dodging the stuff. And people were in enough situations over enough time, they kind of develop that muscle memory, that sense of planning, and eventually your guild as a whole overcomes the challenge. Compared to, let's say, the Stone Legion generals that came after it, a couple of issues there, but like one of the central mechanics that was being solved by weak auras was like, all right, there's a whole bunch of soaks that need to be covered over the course of the fight, and it's not realistic to have that like 7 to 8 soaks up simultaneously, where you need to also account for like, well, this person just got targeted by different mechanics, so they need a backup to go in and do it for them.
Yeah, so it sounds initially like it's, we're restricting what add-ons can do, but really we're opening up the universe of mechanics that can exist in a WoW boss without, because there are so many that you could think of right now where all of them would be, this is going to get solved by this, right? This is going to get solved by this, but if that's not the answer, then now the designers have all these tools back, and we can get these mechanics that maybe haven't been used since MOP because we've been weak auring them ever since, and now we get to solve them with our brains again.
And he even mentioned too, he said like, well, there's a lot of swirlies now.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, like, oh, we can always default to this and a few other things because you're not going to solve that with weak aura, so we can add fights where that's not a thing. But you remove that, that friction of there's too many swirlies goes away. And I think there's assignment, like doing a lot of these assignment bosses without a weak aura that could work would be like really fun. Like it's fun to do that. It's fun when...
Dude, the swirlies just immediately makes me think of this.
Yeah, you would compare to... I have the ghost.
Sure you guys have seen this video. But like when I see this, and these little circles come out, I don't even know what raid tier this is.
Okay, get out the seed. I'm done.
So he picked up his ice cream.
Maybe still kill it. Cost me a lot of damage. Both of our up AMZs are dead.
Dude, it's this part right here. This is on the jailer, I think.
Lose damage to that. Okay, go to your spots. Knockbacks in 2, 3, 2, 1. This knockback's 2
Dude, look at this.
Bardic can block it.
One more.
Yeah, okay, so I'm pretty sure most of the MC breakers were MC there.
Yeah, we didn't even make weak aura that.
Dude. Too much. Too much. Just like there's swirlies all over the screen. It's too much. Get rid of that. Doesn't need to be that much.
You have 5 people that need to soak something like the last phase of Gallywix. There's a frontal on a side of a room, and 2 people die. And right now, weak aura is just like, okay, well, then we're going to sign backup. So these 2 people get a big green thing on their screen, go soak that. That is something where that fight is spread out enough where you could actually communicate that. We need 2 people on the right, to back up because 2 soakers are dead. Who can do it? This person says something, this person says something. Now, obviously, you're not going to have that kind of communication like heroic and normal. Maybe you won't be in comms, whatever, but in Mythic, that's perfectly reasonable, right? A lot of the things, like, we could probably count, honestly, on 1, maybe 2 hands over the last like 4 or 5 years, how many bosses would you meaningfully would have to have a mechanic change. But they are very impactful, very memorable, and they have been purely defined by that. Are you worried at all about the communities, and this has certainly been ramping up over time, like you mentioned, even for us, we were much more just do the mechanic 4 or 5 years ago than we are now. Are you worried that there has been this built-in reliance on it that might be hard to shake when creating new raid bosses?
Absolutely. And I think that some of that gets back to us knowing that we need to really ease into this, that any world where we just kind of rip the Band-Aid off and say, all right, have fun, we're in a new world, as opposed to building up more built-in functionality, starting to have clearer visuals, simplify some mechanics, and then building counters and have classes designed around a world where we know that this isn't possible. As long as people are set up for success, I think we'll be fine. Certainly, if we were to disable any functionality and then players went into a new tier and we're just wiping to bosses and they used to clear heroic comfortably and now they're brick walled halfway through heroic, yeah, players that would be a source of tremendous frustration. But we know that we need to avoid that by any means possible, and we have a lot of work to do before we get there.
Something that
Players almost certainly have an over reliance on add-ons, and that's okay because the game has been designed and developed to be played in such a way that that is expected of you. So shifting away from that philosophical approach to the game is going to take a while, but it's a very worthwhile endeavor to undergo. I think that the add-on thing is obviously extremely problematic. I've talked a bunch of times in this video about that, but the fact that they're going to pull the trigger on this and they know they're going to get pushback, but they understand why, and they understand that in part it's a majorly an issue of their own game design, it is really good, because that means that when they do get the negative backlash, they're not just immediately going to pull the plug on this project. They're going to see it through. And I think ultimately for the future of World of Warcraft and for the health of the game, this is a massive step in the right direction.
really encourages me is the ping system. That seems like such a perfect way to give us an option to identify where we're going, right? You can just ping where you're going, and then you don't have to, try and communicate with words. Hey, I'm going to move over to the left 20 yards, right? Just ping where I'm going, and that opens up an ability to solve these, again, in a YOLO style, right?
I have no idea what the hell this is. I've never in my life seen that system before. More communication's good, though, I will say that.
Rather than
I think your guild did that.
Yeah.
So the Echo of Neltharion, right?
Yeah, we just pinged it.
Yeah, so famously,
it,
everyone had the maps for that. Here's your exact spot you go, and then his guild was like, you know what, everyone just ping your spot. Mostly it gets covered. People go to the same spot every pull. But if you see 2 pings in a spot, 1 person has to move, right? And that could largely solve a mechanic with just something that's already built into the game.
Yeah, I think the ping system is something we've also talked about looking to improve and to kind of broaden the sorts of things you can do with it to give people more tools to solve these problems in a coordinated way, but using their own skill and expression instead of another tool.
When I think of World of Warcraft, I'm always thinking back to when I first started playing the game.
Pings are the best thing they have ever added. I mean, it looks cool. I'll tell you right now, I'd do anything to have raid markers in Classic WoW. Not a marker that goes on top of your head, an actual raid marker I could put on the ground. Dude, I would love to have that. So I'm sure pings are just an extension of that, just having access to more information and being able to communicate with people at a higher level. I was astonished that there were no floor markers. I know, isn't that crazy? Totally nuts.
Game, and there was
not having floor markers is ridiculous.
There's this really exciting moment where I looked at it and I'm like, oh my god, I can make this game look however I want, right? I can put this here, I can have an add-on that tells me what time it is in London, what time it is in Darnassus, right? I can have all the world clocks there if I want. I can have 3 different bars at the bottom of my screen. I can do whatever I want there, and to me that's always been a strength, not a weakness of WoW. So I think there's a lot of people that disagree with me on that, but then there's also people that they hear about Blizzard thinking about restricting add-ons and they're worried about losing that. Is there any intention to go after any of that kind of customization?
Not whatsoever. And in fact, we're doing everything we can and we would do everything we can down the line to minimize any collateral damage to them. But
That is a huge Blizzard W, by the way.
The goal is anything that's cosmetic should be completely fair game. All informational stuff that's out of combat, like, again, you have RP add-ons, help things that are tracking, helping with professions, tracking gathering nodes, helping you with quests, like, you name it, a bunch of accessibility add-ons. All of those, like, there's nothing harmful whatsoever about any of them. The only thing is, at the very end of the day, once we feel like we've done enough on our end to improve baseline functionality, what we'd be looking at is the ability to parse real-time combat events in a way that drives, problem solving on the fly.
So it's kind of, we build the scaffolding to then be able to take away the existing weak aura solutions that we have for these. How much of this is, so the thing that's excited me also about edit mode has been, it's so clearly based on what the community has learned over 20 years, right? It's like, oh, the community has
This is LVUI. Like, what you're looking at is Blizzard's version of LVUI, right? Like, this is literally exactly what this is.
revolved around this as a solution for presenting this information. Let's give them that base in the UI rather than making them download something. How much of this initiative is still going to be based on what the community says, how the community reacts, versus which of these things are already kind of locked in decisions?
I'd say basically nothing here is locked in.
Okay.
Really, my hope today is to kind of begin a conversation about that direction and what areas are welcome, what areas maybe have more to do to convince the community on, and what areas we might be wrong on and should, reconsider. Because I think at the end of the day, this game belongs first and foremost to our millions of players. We're trying to serve them as best we can in the long run. And I think our sense is that for many players, the feeling that they have to download and use certain add-ons in order to play the game competitively isn't really part of what's attractive about the game or healthy in the long run. And so if we can pull things back to a place where add-ons are available for those who want to use them, but people aren't feeling pressured by their groups, by just the natural demands of competition and not wanting to lose out to someone who's using more advantages, then that's going to be the healthier route in the long run.
So if I was the kind of person who wanted to write a 10-paragraph forum manifesto, this would be one of the topics to do it on, right?
Absolutely. We'll be reading, we'll be listening. I think this is a long path ahead. And yeah, just, curious to kick off the conversation and hear how people feel about it. So Rotation Assist is coming in 11.1.7, which is going to be hitting the PTR in the very near future. Can't wait to hear people's feedback as they're able to hop on and check it out. We'll be listening closely so we can make it the best it can be for everybody. It's also been amazing to just get a chance to talk through kind of the history of add-ons in WoW, where they are today, and where they might be going in the future. Thank you guys for coming out. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us here. Really looking forward to see what the community has to say about how much they want more of these casts, maybe monthly, maybe bi-weekly, weekly, whatever you guys think, put it in the comments.
Daily.
Daily?
Yeah.
You said it. It's not me. Thank you so much, Liz. This has been really, really awesome.
So, just to,
Been,
I want to end
thank you
on
so
that.
much, Liz. This has been really, really
I want
awesome.
to end on this screen real quick. Just to sort of recap that, as far as my thoughts are concerned, I think this is an extremely positive thing. I think that people who are freaking out over this are short-sighted. They're probably people who don't run communities within the game. This is a net positive. It's not going to affect the way that I play the game at all. This has zero effect on me. I'm like a good player. Like, I don't need a rotational assist add-on to tell me how to play Prot Warrior in Classic, right? What this is going to affect is a handful of players in my guild who are not the best players, who have, looked up and read guides and they're still not performing at a super high level. Now they're going to have an ability in game that's going to help them with their rotation. And I'm excited for that. I think that's good for them. The other majorly glaring thing to me that this could truly be Copium. Classic Plus is not. Classic Plus, that's happening. But controller support for console play. Putting something like this into the game where there's a one button rotational ability, like a macro where you just push one thing, I have to think to myself that partially they're thinking about controller support when they do something like that. Because there are a handful of people who even now, like, they play Classic or they play retail strictly on a controller. Like, that is absolutely something that you can do. But I think getting the majority of players, or even a lot of players, over to do it is going to be really difficult with the way that abilities are currently mapped onto the controller setting and on the buttons. But I think if you can interact and move your character through the game and just play and have fun and level your characters or do quests or complete your dailies and stuff like that, or maybe even do a dungeon, and all you have to do is just kind of push one button for your rotation, I think that's a lot easier to get people involved in. And I think this is something that Blizzard has been, you know, building towards for quite a while. I don't know. I like to think to myself that I would play on a controller. I don't really know realistically how much I would play, you know, as far as in-game raiding and stuff, just because I am our raid leader and our main tank. But as far as just sitting back and chilling on the couch and leveling a character, man, that's awesome. And I really hope that I'm right about this. I hope that we're getting some type of controller support here in the near future, because with the limiting and add-ons and with the rotational assist implementation and all that stuff, I think it's just like, duh, it's a no-brainer. Why would you not do it? You know? But there you go. How World of Warcraft is improving its UI on the WoWcast. Don't really get why people are so negative about this, but you know, whatever. Blizzard can't do anything right to some of these people.